You're all very far away. There are loads of seats here. So I'm going to come closer. So, the future of Drupal teaming. Now mind you, there are a lot of big words and statements in this, because the whole thing is very opinionated. So let's get started. My name is Mathieu Spillebeen. I'm a freelance Drupal front-end developer. I'm also a very random person, usually. I'm one of the visionaries around Front-End United, which is a conference that is around the globe. And I'm also playing visionary behind Compony.io. Now, please reach out to me over Twitter or email now or after the session. I'm going to make sure I answer every question that appears on this screen. If I don't have much time after the session, I'm going to be answering the questions also on Twitter. Now, what am I going to talk about? I'm actually only going to talk about 3 little things. I'm going to start with analyzing a project that I've done some time ago. The project was a massive project, 2 years with a team of 10 people. We're all working on this Drupal 8 website, and after the project was delivered, I kind of had a look at the site and I analyzed both the backend and then the front end. And while analyzing that, I kind of come to my second point. I think I discovered the problem we collectively forgot we had. Once I've shown you that problem, I'm gonna also make you dream up the solution together with me. So, let's start with the backend analysis. So mind you, I am a front-end developer, so this is a very holistic approach to things. Now, this is a very big project, 2 years, 10 people, and after we've delivered, I kind of look at the code base of what is the Drupal backend. I had a look, and the Drupal backend consists of 60, let's get this number right, 62% is Drupal core. So mind you, you literally click download, and you download 62% of Drupal core. That's the part of the backend that is downloaded. On top of that, we download an extra 33% or 32% of Drupal contrib modules. All very good, all very fine, but this is a massive complex project which with a lot of people worked on it, and we also we only were able to write 5% of the code ourselves of the project that we delivered. Now, 5% is actually an amazing number, I think. I just want to hammer on this number just for a few seconds. 5% is actually amazing, because if someone would ask you to make the same project without using Drupal core or Drupal contrib modules, you would need to go 1,900% over budget. Or, the number also means that if for every custom feature that you make, you can download 8 other features first in contrib. So again, the number is showing that we are amazingly productive in Drupal backend. Now also don't tell your client that you only make 5% of the website that you sell. It's not gonna work well. Now, let's move on to the front end. And the front end, I did the exact same thing. Mind you, this is again Drupal specific, all of the analysis. In front end, the number is a bit different. We are all very opinionated as front end developers. We love to build things ourselves. If you look at all the lines of code that are coming from Drupal or that are coming from ourselves, then we see that only 4% is coming from Drupal. 96% of the code you write ourselves. So that means that whenever we start a project, we start almost completely from scratch, nearly all the time. Yet, when we look at the 2 slides ago, we can see that we have a 95% predictability of what Drupal will output. Yet, we all make everything from scratch by ourselves, and each our own companies. Okay, so let's summarize those numbers a bit better. On the top left corner, everything in purple is the stuff you download, everything in red is the stuff you make yourself. 62% comes from Drupal core, 33% comes from contrib. I can't make or do mods while I'm also walking, so I'm going to assume that 5% is going to be custom. The top part is what we call the backend layer, right? The bottom part is what we call the front-end layer. That's actually bullshit. It's not a front-end layer. For me, a layer is something that we use to compile things together. What is that? Well, it's my head, but also it's not a layer. It is a blob. We've created every project over and over again, a front-end blob. Now, where am I? Yeah, it's a front-end blob. Yet, I've seen a lot of front-end talks already in this camp. So, who of you does front-end development? Okay. Who of you also writes their SAS or CSS or less in a component way? Yes, we all do. But nearly all of us also compile, as soon as we've done all of that component way theming, we compile all of the stuff we have into one big file. We do the same thing for JavaScript. We make every JavaScript function very component specific, yet we compile everything together. Why? We keep making this blob. We have the libraries API in Drupal. You can't explain the libraries API to any other developer that's not working in Drupal. The libraries API is actually the most brilliant thing that has ever been delivered to us as front-end developers within Drupal. Why? The libraries API allows us to teach Drupal in which context to load which assets. That's amazing. We can literally teach our own CMS to know when to load which front-end asset. Yet, how many of us only have one library defined in our team? The global one. Because we have this personal need of compilation. And as soon as we get over that personal need of compilation, we can start thinking about what if we have a front-end layer again. And we only work in components. And we stop compiling everything together. Then that would mean that we can kind of take the same approach to Drupal frontend as we do to Drupal backend. A lot of our components are going to be reusable. Well, in the project that I've worked in, 1 out of 3 components was reusable just out of the box. Which is awesome. And this is, I think, the future of Drupal theming. And this is my dream. Now, that's my dream. Thank you very much for coming to my talk. Nah, I'm joking. I wouldn't talk this fast if I only had this to say. Also, you didn't applause. No, but at the end, that's how a talk works, all right? At the end, you applause, okay? So, no, actually, luckily I'm kidding, because it was my dream also a year ago. And a year ago, I was dreaming about this at home. No one understood me. My mom called me crazy. I also dreamed about it at work. And I dreamt about it so much that they actually fired me because of it. Now, this is a very good thing, because I got fired over a year ago, which means I had a year to make the solution that I was dreaming about. Now, how does this solution look like? The solution comes in 3 layers. The very first one is the most important one. If I get anything across today, it's the bottom layer. And the bottom layer is the only thing that is required for you to use if you want to think in a component way. It's the new team structure. I've taken a Drupal theme and I've changed it a little bit to accommodate us and no longer thinking in these blob ways. The team will become a mere collection of components, because that's what we're always working in, components. Once I've shown you this new team structure, the other 2 layers are actually optionally on top. Now, the very first layer on top is a tooling workflow. Because if we work in this new semantic way, we kind of need the tools to not cause every developer from us to burn out in trying to figure a gulp or configure a gulp in order to make us work in these component ways. Once I've shown you the tooling workflow that I've built on top, I can also show you the platform, and that's the horse icon you see over there. Well, it's a pony, but it's hard to, anyway. It's a platform to share, and the platform is there because if we all make these components, share the components. We can literally create a community around the work that we've done. And that's the thing I'm hoping for. That's the thing I'm dreaming of. Now, the top layer, the purple one, is the platform itself. That's Compony.io. Simple website, but from the platform, you can also download the Compony theme. From there, the Compony theme has the tooling workflow embedded into the new theme structure. So, let's first cover the first one. All the rest, like, you can use the new theme structure and never think of the tooling workflow. You can just throw that away. You also never have to use the actual platform. That's also fine. The only thing I really want to get across is the new theme structure, and it will allow us to work as front-end developers and be proud of our work. Finally. For me, anyway. If I have work. Okay. So, the new theme structure. How does that look like? Well, if you download a theme, in this case, the theme is called My Theme, and the 3 bottom files kind of make sense. You've seen those files before. It's a very normal theme. The only thing that's actually relevant is the components folder. You can ignore the SAS Essentials folder. It's not important, just a helper folder. The components folder is where all of your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is going to get put into. Why is that important? Because a theme is now merely becoming a collection of components. That's how it always should have been, in my opinion. Now, if you open up the components folder, because this is very simple to understand. If you open up the components folder, in this example, I've already made a few components, and I have now the global component, the node component, and the taxonomy term component. It's very simple to understand. Every folder has a component, because the theme is a collection of components. Anyway, let's assume we have a component called status messages in there. We open that up just to show how a component internally looks, because this is actually where the interesting parts start happening. The very first thing you should notice is that we have 2 levels within a component. We have a dist folder, and then we have the root, right? Why do we have a dist folder in every single component? Because we have to stop compiling everything, damn it, together. The compilation process should be component specific, because Drupal can always handle that. So we have a dist folder. Now it's very, very logical how that works. The SAS file gets compiled into the CSS file, the JavaScript file gets linted into the dist folder also, and the image gets optimized also to the dist folder. Whatever needs a compilation, whatever needs some sort of a handling by a tool, will be compiled into the dist folder, as it should have been. But we no longer combine components together. Then we have 2 more files. We have one status messages.html.twig, and we have the libraries.yaml. Now, it's really cool actually, this one. The libraries.yaml is defined right there in the component where it should be, and it's linking to a CSS file and a JavaScript file. The CSS file is right there. The JavaScript file is right there. So it's very simple to see what the library does. The library's name is status messages because it's coming from the status messages component. It's all very it's not complex, it's not rocket science. And here is where the wow moment comes. I'm not going to say wow because it's going to look so simple. If you open up the html.twig file, this is where all the magic happens, because we attach the library that we just created onto the HTML that's right next to it. This might seem like a very small thing, but it actually isn't, because the amount of advantages we get by doing this is stunning. Like, quick recap. The HTML file is, the libraries file is attached to the HTML. HTML is fetched by Drupal, but the libraries then links to the JavaScript and to the CSS. And the image that's also right there is also going to be linked in the CSS or JavaScript. So what we now see, what we're now looking at, is a front-end Drupal themed functional component, completely standing on its own. It doesn't need anything else. And I think that's amazing. So once I got this working, I go, yeah, let's keep going. So, what are all the advantages of the new theme structure? Well, let's start with the first one. You know, when you're having an image in your folder, in your theme somewhere, and you're linking to it, then you always go like, all right, background image, colon, URL, open parentheses or whatever, and you go dot dot slash, right? And then you go another dot dot slash, 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 and then you count folders. How high do you have to go in order to get to the images folder? Because we have this weird compilated blob always. You know, that's how it usually looks. But now we no longer have to do that because the image is right next to the CSS. Now this is a very simple advantage, but I just want to show you that everything becomes way simpler to explain, way less fragile. You can drag the folder around and it's not going to break. You can nest the folder, it's not going to break. It just works. Now, let's move on to a more actual advantage. I live by the rule that complexity arrives from abstracting too soon. Sounds like a quote that you will never understand, but it's actually as soon as you abstract something, something becomes more complex. If you start in a project by abstracting everything you have a very complex structure and you still have to start. Now, what that means for me in terms of Compony, it means that if you have the components folder and you only have 2 components and you're working away and all of a sudden you're thinking, yeah, I need to change node article HTML. So you're changing node article HTML, so you're making a new file, you're adding a new folder because it's a new component, it's a variation of an earlier made component. You change something in that file, but now you have 3 components and 2 of them are nodes or variations of nodes. So it's simple, you can nest them however you want. It's a flexibility. It's an abstraction that you only have to make as soon as you arrive to it. Which also means in a very complex project that for me I usually group them based upon content type and then based upon the view mode of that content type. Okay, another one. Readability. It's another term people use for literally everything and nothing, right? It means that we have now a folder containing everything of that component. If you give that to your backend developer that you're usually working with, well, I'm usually working in a team, they will understand. If they remove something of the SAS, they will know exactly what will break. How many teams offer that flexibility of readability? Not a lot of teams can do that. So we have teamed functional Drupal front-end components. That's the main key. If you throw away that folder, you're going to break 1 component. Another one, performance. This is actually huge. Well, this was the main key why I kept going with this idea. Let's say you write Node CSS. Where would you write Node CSS? Well, you would write it in the Node component. The Node component would then have a libraries node where you link the Node CSS. The Node library you would then attach to Node HTML. Because it's all just the same name, it kind of makes sense. But that also means that your Node CSS is only going to be loaded on the Node detail pages. It's not going to be loaded on taxonomy term detail pages because there's no nodes there. Well, in this example anyway. That's actually a huge benefit for performance. Let's take another example. Let's say we have page CSS from the page library attached to the page HTML, then it's going to be loaded on both, because they're both using the page HTML. Drupal is smart enough to know of these contexts and compiles CSS and libraries and attaches them how it should be. So you no longer, or you don't have to go diving into it and have to understand how it all works. No, if you attach the right CSS to the right HTML, it's going to work. And the libraries API was there since Drupal 6, but there was never a backend developer maybe that explained it well enough to us. Maybe that's it, I don't know. Anyway, that kind of means that in this massive project, or huge project I should say, it meant that we were able to strip away 90% of our CSS on every page load. 90%. That's not some better aggregation or some, I was able to remove 5 lines out of, no. 90% of all the CSS that we have written in the 2 years was no longer loaded on that page. For JavaScript it was 88%. Of course that's just one example. But it shows that by default we get this. If you still want to load all of your CSS and all of your JavaScript onto every single page, you can. That's perfect. Just load everything into the same page. But then know that you're doing that, because now this is the default and it kind of doesn't really make sense. we have conditional loading. It's almost the same. It's actually another name for exactly the same, but I have a really cool example. Let's say you have the views infinite scroll component, right? And it is containing HTML, CSS, and a libraries file that links the two together. But let's say you just started off with this project, and you know you don't have the views infinite scroll module enabled yet. Then Drupal is never going to go look for, oh wow, you have a views-infinite-scroll-pager.html.twig. No, it couldn't give a shit about that file. It's never going to look for that file because there is no module using it, because the module is not enabled yet. Which also means that the libraries that is attached to that HTML will never be loaded. So you literally have conditional loading. And then once you enable the views infinite scroll module, well, Drupal is going to go, oh, I need this template file. Ah, the module has the template file. Great. And then it's going to go scan the theme. Oh, the theme also has that theme file or that HTML file. So it's going to go to the theme. And then it's going to say, oh, wow, this HTML file is attaching a library. So it's going to go find that library. And then the library defines CSS. And then it's going to get that CSS and throws it in the aggregated CSS of that page. But only on the pages that actually are using the infinite scroll functionality. This modules have been working. This is how also we should have been working in the front-end layer. Whew. Okay. Maintainability. This is also a fun one, actually. I've worked a lot in big projects where someone asks me, there was a little bug in, for example, the Node JavaScript, whatever. And you're changing something and you commit it, and all of a sudden you broke the UI of the entire website because you just tried to fix one little bug. It happens all the time. We're humans. We make mistakes a lot. But now with Compony, it means that you will only break the pages where you actually are loading that library. You won't break the UI on every page everywhere. You're only going to break the things that you were working on, which makes a lot of sense. Now, this means that if we make those projects with Compony and with the component system, we can now drag and drop our work cross projects, which I think is amazing, right? Because we always nearly start from scratch. But if we can drag and drop them cross projects, I can also drag and drop them to you. Because I don't know what you do, but I hope you're doing Drupal front-end development, because you're sitting in the front row. But I could drag and drop it to you. But you're not from the same company as I do, or as I am, so we can also drag and drop it across companies, which means that we can now have an open source community around our work. It no longer goes on a website and 4 years later the website is old, is replaced, and our work is gone. No, we can actually have a valid contribution, long term. Also teach people about the code that we write. Okay. We also have a lot of flexibility. I already talked about this a little bit by how we nest components. But now you might be thinking, I'm not going to write my entire team and every HTML file a new component. And no, you shouldn't. Whatever you want to do in the beginning, just put everything in global. You have been doing that very likely up until now anyway. But then you can start abstracting. Maybe you only want to abstract the CSS only components. Because why not? You don't need to have in every component HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can, as long as you stay close to the pillars of the web, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you're going to be fine. CSS only component, or maybe a HTML only component, where you link or when you attach multiple libraries onto the same HTML. Because that's flexibility too. Or a JavaScript only component. Or maybe a CSS and JavaScript only component without HTML, where you're just thinking of, oh, if I use that class and I attach that JavaScript and JavaScript only component, or CSS and JavaScript only component, it's all going to work. Or HTML and CSS only component, or HTML and JavaScript only component, or all three. Whatever variation you want to make, it's going to be fine, because Drupal is going to be able to handle it. And I was able to handle that from the very start when I was working, Drupal 6. So, that was the team structure. If you're convinced about anything and you now want to doze off, that's completely fine. The team structure is the most valuable thing I want to get across, because that's what's stopping us as front-end developers within Drupal to keep evolving. The second thing is the tooling workflow. Tooling workflow for me means the tools should help us. They shouldn't be limiting our speed of work. They should be enhancing us. They should be keeping us going. So, the tooling workflow, how did I start doing that? Now, mind you, this tooling workflow is completely optional. You can just plug it off and then plug something else in it. I invented something with Gulp. I made something with Gulp, anyway. It looks like this, gulpfile.js folder, and then you have an nvmrc file and the package.json and the yarn.log. A bunch of extra files that are just for the tools. They're not relevant because they're just tools, right? If you open up that gulpfile.js, it's actually kind of interesting because all the files you can ignore except for config.js, local.config.js, and project.config.js. So every file that ends on config.js is going to be valuable to you. Now this has a very similar link to how Drupal does it, right? Local settings, development settings, blah, blah, blah. So when you download first, you're going to only have a config.js and a project.config.js. So what you do, you copy config.js and you rename it to local config.js. What's the benefit of that? Well, we now have local environment options because you might be working with browser sync, but you might not be. And browser syncing doesn't impact the end result of your code. The client on the browser isn't going to realize if you used browser sync or not. So that's a local environment option. So you open up local.config, and then you can tell your gulp how it should clear your cache when it's needed, or if you're going to use browser sync. If we have local environment options, it also means that we're going to need project environment options. Because if one of us is going to set up the autopilot fixer, and we're going to say, well, I need only the last 2% of the websites, then it's going to impact the CSS. So we need to have config options that are the same for every developer in that project. And that kind of looks like this. There's loads more of options, but this is just like a small snippet. You can define your auto prefixer, the cascade, and so on and so on. And there are many more like that. So, as soon as you, I kind of skipped over there for a second. As soon as you configured the config.js files, you run npm install and you say gulp, and everything is going to work automatically. How is it going to work automatically? Well, it's going to auto-maintain dist folders for you. You don't have to go into every component, make a dist folder, then configure that SAS file is going to go to that dist folder. No, everything is automatically maintained. That means is you drag in, for example, and it's going to create automatically a dist folder next to it, and it's going to have the same name. If you rename that logo.svg and you say my logo.svg, it's going to nicely rename it also in the dist folder. It's super fast because it's component-based compiling too, because it's only doing that, the gulp, when you're doing that, which I think is really cool. You also have lossless image optimization. So I'm now at 30 minutes. I have 15 more minutes. I'm going to skip a bit faster over the features because there are going to be terms that you already know. If you drag in a bunch of images, they're going to appear in your dist folder optimized, right? We also have linting of JavaScript and of SAS. We have JavaScript uglification. We have Babelify and Browserify for the ones of us that want to write cutting-edge JavaScript, but still needs to work on every browser. We also have auto-prefixing of CSS by default. We have component-based compiling. Okay, I'm going to dive into this one. Gulp will only compile the component that you're currently working in. What that means is everything is component-based. Now, I know there is an echo in this room when I say component, because I've been saying component a lot. Now, if you save page.scss, you're going to only compile the page component. That's only going to compile the page CSS. The same thing for any other folder that you're compiling, which makes it blazingly fast, because we no longer have this personal need of compilation the blob. What else? We have multi-team support. it's again actually the same. If the gulp is component-based compiling, then gulp doesn't really care about how many components you have and if they are divided over multiple teams. Which would mean if you drag out these files and you drag them to the root of your project, and then you define where your gulp teams are, so my first team and then my second team in your project configuration, because every developer needs the same configuration for this setup, it's just going to compile perfectly, because it doesn't care about how many components you have, where those components reside, etc., etc. So it's an amazing benefit, I think. It's even smart enough to rebuild Drupal's cache, because I was a bit annoyed. After a while, you are a front-end Drupal developer, right? And you're working in this project, and every time you change something, all of a sudden, you changed something, but the page is not changing. So you go, okay, I'm going to clear cache. And then you change something in JavaScript, and again, the page is not changing. So you're clearing cache again, and then all of a sudden, well, I cleared cache now, but it's still not changing. So the clear cache wasn't valid for that. So what actually means that as a front-end Drupal developer, you kind of need to know when to clear your cache, which is bullshit. Because why would we have to need to know when to clear our cache? It's like, Drupal is already funky and weird enough for us Drupal front-end developers. We don't need to know if we rename an HTML.twig file, we need to clear our cache. If we change something inside HTML.twig file, we don't need to clear our cache. If we change something inside the libraries file, we do need to clear our cache. It's logical for when you know enough Drupal. It's not logical for Drupal front-end developers. So gulp is actually smart enough within your teams that you've defined to know when to clear your cache. Which means if you rename an HTML.twig file, Drupal needs to clear the cache, apparently. So you rename it, and then you get a browser native notification that Drupal is clearing the cache. If you filled in the command for clearing the cache in your local config.js. But it's not going to clear the cache if you change something inside the HTML. So it's smart enough. So actually it's going to clear the cache whenever you add, remove, move or remove add, rename, move or remove an HTML.twig file, or it's going to clear the cache or rebuild the cache when you add, change, move or remove a libraries.yaml file. Because that's the logic, apparently. It's refactor friendly. This is a fun one. It's refactor friendly. We're all well, I'm just going to assume we're all front-end developers. If we're all front-end developers and we all love to do front-end development, but we don't like to do refactoring, we're actually not doing front-end development. We're adding front-end development. It's also fun, but it's something else. If you're really doing front-end development, you're usually refactoring a lot of the time. So it's very refactor friendly. And our tools should accommodate us in refactoring. So for example, you have an empty folder, testy variation, inside a component named testy. If we duplicate testy.js into testy variation.js, it's going to put it into the dist of the original component. But if you then drag it into a nested component, it's going to say, oh, put a dist folder there and add the JavaScript file there and remove it from the original dist folder where it first appeared. So you have auto-maintained dist folders, you can rename entire components, you can drag components around, you can download components, drop them in, and it's going to rebuild the cache if it's needed. Everything works. I didn't have to restart my gulp for months when I was working, which is nice. Usually you clear the cache, something breaks, you have errors everywhere. At least that's how I develop usually. Now, we have loads more. We have SAS globbing, source mapping, browser syncing, auto cleaning up of empty directories, because it happens a lot too with Git. That was a tooling workflow. So that's optional, again, on top of the very first layer, but it's something to get you started. Test it out. If you want to swap out the tool, that's fine. If you don't like gulp, it's fine. It's not going to impact the end result of your project. So the next one is going to be the platform to share. Because if we have these functional components, we are able to create a platform to share our work that we all have together. So, how does that look like? Well, you're going to see a lot of similarities with Drupal.org. For example, before we had Composer, we had a big blue button on the top right corner of Drupal.org where we downloaded Drupal core, right? We downloaded the 62% of Drupal core, and then we select which downloaded contributed modules that we need or that we want for our project. Well, Compony works in much the same way. You go to Compony, you download the theme structure and the tools, and then you just browse around and you go, oh, this component looks interesting, or this component looks from that module that I'm going to use. So it already, that's how it currently is working. Because it's a proven concept. Because why not? Now, oi, okay. We're back. Are we in the right place? Yes. Which means that we need project agnostic components. Because if you download the module from Drupal.org, you don't get the project-specific stuff in there. You don't get, oh, this is a name of a project that was used before inside the module code. No. Every module that you download from Drupal.org is project agnostic because we've abstracted the logic from it. The same thing has to happen for components on Compony. How do we do that? Well, it's very obvious actually, because let's say you're making a purple website and you're making an orange website. Your purple component is not going to work in your orange website, is it? It's going to look shit. So we have to abstract the color, you have to strip away the fonts and the variables from Sass, and we have a perfectly black and white sketchbook component where we can start from. It's still going to be themed, but it's going to be black and white. It's still going to be functional, but it's going to be less opinionated. Now, the advantages of the new platform to share. We have now the capability of sharing information on components, which means this is, for example, the text drop-down component. We have an image that's now still because of a screenshot I took. We have some explanation. We have instructions for when there are instructions needed. We can say, well, it's using Sass, it's responsive, it's using Drupal behaviors, it's accessible, but it's still using jQuery. Because, hey, we've been working in jQuery for all of this time. I'm not perfect in JavaScript yet. I'm getting there. Well, no, I'm getting to learn JavaScript, nowhere near perfect. But it's still using jQuery, and that's fine. Because that's already a component someone can learn from. Another advantage is that we can now collaborate on components. As soon as you contribute a component to Compony, Compony is going to make a GitLab repository for the component. Which is great, because Drupal modules are now also using GitLab. And we have every feature available to us that GitLab is offering. The repository, for one, where we can inspect the code, obviously, but also we have a web IDE where we can not have to clone all of our components all the time to make a little change if someone reports a bug. No, we can just literally do it in there. You see that we have all the files in there. We can commit from inside our browser, which is awesome. And then the issue boards, obviously, hopefully we won't get many issues on every component. But we have every advantage of GitLab. Now, up until now, this is very similar to Drupal.org, right? It kind of feels like I'm making a twin. But there is a big difference. And that's where we invent component variations. Think about Drupal.org. If you download the views module, I know it's now in core, but because we all know the views module. No, actually, the EU cookie compliance module. We've all downloaded that module, we all teamed it loads of times, and it's really annoying to team. We all teamed it as front-end developers, but still we can't share that code between each other. So let's say I made a component with my implementation of the EU cookie compliance module, and I've named it Material Cookie Compliance because I've been inspired by Google Material Design. Then if you think of the module on Drupal.org, to make the link again, there's not going to be another module doing the exact same thing, but a very slightly bit different. No, we collaborate usually on the code. With Compony it's a bit different, because we're all so very opinionated, we can make multiple variations of the very same component. So for example, someone else could have made smooth cookies, very smooth animations, for example. Someone totally different, exactly the same component, but forked it, changed some things, and that's perfect. Because I'm now working on a browser extension. It's almost working, but it's still a proof of concept. If you go to the project page of Drupal.org, you can now say, oh, I'm going to download this module. I'm not going to theme it again, because screw this. No, it's way too hard. I'm just going to download one of them components, and if you plug them in, it's just going to work. Which is amazing, I think, in many ways. Now, I think everything is amazing, so I'm very biased. On the platform, we also have component collections. Why? Because certain components just belong better together with other components. For example, form items. They're a real pain to theme in Drupal. They're a massive pain to theme. You can lose loads of time trying to get it into a structure that you can give it back to a backend developer and they can keep coding and nothing should break. Well, I've done loads of work on them and I grouped them into a collection. You can just click download, you have the entire collection from there, and you can have a starting point where I've already worked over a year on this. Well, off and on, obviously. Now, I can hear you thinking, yeah, but what about Webpack? Do we have Webpack? Do we have less support? Is React already inside of it? Is Vue already inside of it? Well, yes, actually, it is. But for now, it's only inside of your heads, that implementation. Because it's an open source collaboration on the tools. We can, with a community, if a lot of people start using this, a lot of people are gonna want, oh, I want a React component, I want this, I want that support. And we can all start collaborating on it. And the tools are there to collaborate, because also the tools are open source. So, how much time do I have left? Okay. You can finally become a proud Drupal developer. Because, tell your neighbor, tell the person closest to you what version of Node is that you're using, the latest. It's embarrassing. I don't know what Node I'm using. Or, when is the last time you updated your NPM packages? Scary as shit, like. Oh yeah, skip this one. When is the last time you went into the command line and ran drush-cr manually because you were not sure what you were doing? It happens loads. We finally can stop doing that. We can finally work at the speed that we were intended to work at. Now, and another advantage of the platform is that we have loads of documentation and conventions that we can collaborate on. For example, component naming, component nesting conventions, twig extending conventions, hook extending conventions. There is some documentation on if you're only tippy-toeing into PHP from or as a front-end developer, what are the only 4 functions you actually kind of need to know in order to do loads. It's all very Drupal front-end focused, and I invite you to have a look at it. The URL is weird because I'm a front-end developer. There. Now, let's put it all together. I hope this video is going to work. Yes, it is. So this is just a normal web page. Let's go a bit back. So we start that. It's a normal web page. That's the Compony platform, but let's ignore that. You can see that this is the output of Drupal set message. The little text. I know it's not, I'm sorry, Gabor, it's not Drupal 9 yet, but it's the output of Drupal set message, and it's coming from Classy, and that's how it by default looks from Classy. There's no theming in there, which is kind of normal. So what if you now go to Compony and you download the status messages component? You click download, you can see the stats there. You click download, you're gonna get a zip, you unzip it, and you throw it into your project. If your gulp is running, well, you're adding an HTML.twig file, so your cache needs to clear. So as soon as you drag it into your components folder, gulp's gonna try to clear your cache. Well, not try, it's gonna clear your cache. It's gonna get another notification as soon as you've cleared your cache. There we go, and now we're gonna reload, and now we're gonna have 10 seconds of randomness, because the cache just rebuilt. It's gonna take some time. So mind you, we just went to the platform, downloaded the component, dragged it into components folder, and we refreshed the page. Now look at the output of Drupal set message. It now looks like, without color, because everything is black and white, it just works. If you inspect now that part of the page, you can see that it comes from themes, Compony, components, status messages.html.twig. That already picks that component up because it just works by default. And that's the strength I think that I really want to get across. And this is now one of my last slides. And I want to close down on this note. I want to close down on the note that my name is still Mathieu Spillebeen. Oh, I have the questions actually in the thingy too. Yeah, thank you. My name is still Mathieu, and for the last 4 years, I've had the privilege of finding people that have the exact same vision and ambition like I do, and that's our love for Drupal and for frontend. That combination. For example, with Frontend United, we reached tens of thousands of people all over the globe. We were able to organize 22 conferences in the last 4 years, just with a bit of passion. With a few volunteers, we were able to reach massively far. And with Compony, I hope and I intend to do the exact same thing. So if there's any bone in your body that thinks, meh, I kind of like what Mathieu did there, join me. Tell your employer or tell your colleagues that you like Compony. Tell them about Compony if you like it. If you don't like it, make it better and then tell your colleagues. Or tell your employer that you want to pay the count so I can keep helping you. Help me help you. I also give workshops. I also give presentations. And please reach out to me if you have any questions. I don't know if we have much time left now. But also afterwards, I'm going to make sure I answer all the questions on Twitter, all the ones I get now. And I would love some company on the way, because it's a really uphill battle, because Drupal is very back-end focused. Thank you very much. All right. What percentage of... Can you still hear me? Yes. What percentage of the custom code is config, if accounted for? What percentage of the custom code is config? Ah, you mean the very first slides? Yes. Well, measuring complexity is a very tricky thing. You can do loads of things. You can look at the schedule of how an API works internally, and you can map all of the parts that interconnect, and you can measure the complexity by abstracting everything into loads of complex. I have a slide, but then I have to get rid of this slide. So measuring complexity is an incredibly difficult thing to do. So what I did was I looked at the Drupal backend and I literally measured or counted every line of code that I had. And counting every line of code, counting every file, I figured, because we're now doing OOP, that every file equals one complexity. So even if the config is not in there, because we also have libraries and vendors that we have to rely on, if we count those two together, we're actually only at 1% of custom code that we write ourselves, because we're depending on so many third-party libraries. So percentage of custom code is config. It's not even included in there. So the number is actually even more telling if we would count config with it. Second one, can you filter out redundancies? What if two components use the same assets or define the same or very similar styling? It's actually more of a front-end question than of a Compony question, I think. Because, hey, don't upvote now. So let's say you attach a certain library to one component and then to another component. Drupal is going to be smart enough to not load in the same asset twice. It's only going to load in the asset. No, the browser is actually going to be smart enough to not load in the asset twice if you don't even have aggregation turned on. If you have teaming that's very similar from one component to another, I would recommend abstracting that as a class. And you use class-based conventions to all the teaming that's the same between two components. You make a CSS-only component from it, and both are extending from it, or both are attaching that CSS-only component. Same thing works for HTML or JavaScript. The 96% custom teaming usually takes as much time as the 5% custom modules. Yes, exactly. What exactly was your point with this comparison? Well, the comparison was made to show that we weren't downloading anything from the community as front-end developers. We have a 95% predictability of what will come out of Drupal. Yet, why do we love Drupal? Let me put it this way. We love Drupal because we can collaborate. Yet the collaboration seems to stop as soon as we start talking about Drupal frontend. Then everyone just goes on their cloud, flies away, and makes something really complex and weird and very non-Drupal specific. If we stay a bit closer to Drupal, we can use the community that we already have, and we can build amazing things without making everything headless. Because as soon as we make something headless, what do? We create a React application or a Vue application or whatever, and we have a new blob. We literally devote all of our free time into making new blobs. And that's what the comparison was about. The big red thing is just a blob. Custom code is all nicely configured into modules that you can disable. Frontend is usually not that flexible. Let's see if I can scroll in here. Yes. I'm just going to go from there because I find, I don't know, 3 more. Yeah? Sorry? Yeah, of course. I'm going to take a screenshot so I can answer them afterwards. Perfect.